Francisco. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, man. Over here, a little early in the San Francisco Bay Area, but always a pleasure to talk to you, man. So I think
Okay.
it's always an honor to be in your presence, man, even by Zoom, which is totally cool.
Lowercase letters, by the way, Zoom.
There you go, there you go. But let me give it the 3, 2, 1, and we'll get started.
Okay.
Again, 3, 2, 1. Well, it's a great honor to welcome Ron Carter, one of the preeminent bassists of our time, a legend in jazz, to KCSM. He is somebody that is celebrating his 87th birthday. And Ron, a belated happy birthday. How you doing, man?
I feel like I'm 15, 8 plus 7.
Well, that's a good way to feel, man, because I think that overall you worked hard, man, all these years, playing that arco bass, lugging it all around. Do you still get joy out of playing that bass?
That's why I'm still doing it, man. I'm looking forward to my first gig in New York in a while at Birdland to June 11th to 15th with Emmett Cohen and his trio. Get a chance to get the barnacles off the bass or the cobwebs off the strings, and let's try to make some music here, guys.
I think it's beautiful, man. But one of the things that I have appreciated, and I saw this recently, was you talking to a young bass player about that bass, and basically you described it as this box of air, and how this box of air, the way that you plug those strings is an art in itself to be able to get the right sound. Talk about that right sound of that arco bass.
Well, I try to have my students understand that when they leave my lessons in my home, my small studio, by the way, uh, they will not sound like me. They will only sound like what they hear of them sounding like. And one of my jobs is to convince them that we all have our sound. You have to find yours. And I try to show you methods that I use, that I continue to use to make my sound available to me and the listener when my bass comes out of that case. Uh, we talked, how I think uh, 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 if the bass players really knew how the bass worked, Jesse, and understood what it took to make the air in the bass function a certain scientific fashion, they would play less hard and the sound would come out bigger because the molecules, there's air in this box with a stick inside. It's all going the same way, you know? And the more power you put to that box with this confined area, with these two F holes on the side, the air in the side base goes like this. And
Hmm.
there's as much cancellation of the molecules as the air productive stuff, and I hope that after the lessons we have here, and I play with them just to show them what I mean and what it sounds like, they go away feeling like, okay, I can hear what he's doing. Now I got to start hearing what kind of sound I want to be responsible for.
Mm. But you have created a sound that has graced, thousands of recordings. And I think that one of the beauties of it is that, you actually draw from, the cello as an inspiration to really being able to do what you do on the bass. And, that's a special instrument as well for Ron Carter. And I remember those very early recordings that you did, they were featuring you on the cello. And talk about, the importance of the cello in your upbringing.
Well, I think one of the things I learned, just about as studying the cello was how to practice. I think I never went to the practice room looking for licks to play or necessarily to emulate my teacher. I went to the practice room to see when I left the practice room, what did I learn that I can carry over till tomorrow? What did I not quite get a taste for, but I know that flavor is out there somewhere. And I can only find this taste if I continue mixing ingredients of wherever they come from, you know. And to this day, I still use that analogy with my students. Before after we have finished our lesson, Jesse, I have them read back my comments to them. I don't tape it. Don't give me the iPhone stuff. No, just sit down there. Let's get some language skills going here. Improve your penmanship, because when this lesson is over, the only connection to this lesson is the notes you took during the lesson. So I implore them, before you practice every day, just read these notes, because these notes should give you a view on what I hope to gain for this next 2 hours that you practice, or whatever time you put in. And when you finish this practice time, Jesse, read the notes again to see how you did.
Mm.
That's the first step in being disciplined and being responsible.
And it
I
definitely
learned that a long time ago.
and it impacted you well. I think that's important. But you were, born in a town outside of Detroit, Ferndale, Michigan. When you were up and coming, man, who were you listening to? What was the environment like musically in Ferndale?
Well, that's one of the tragedies of our history, which I'm sure you're aware of. It was not called a city because they wouldn't allow a black community to be incorporated, and all the things that went along with that. Just a little history thrown in the dust here. I'm from a family of 10. I have a brother and 6 sisters, my parents. And my parents were determined to not let society dictate the outcome of our lives. We were told that we wouldn't need to, don't study Latin because you won't need that digging ditches. Or, you're third grade, that's pretty good for you. And my mother went up to school, man. My dad, they were enraged, to say the least, that you could talk to my son and my daughter of the limited your view of them. You know, Having been instilled with this pride of our ability and our place in society as we viewed it equally. So those things we knew that to get that space in our head would be to be a disciplined person, to have a goal. At this time, my goal was to be a good cellist, and I was considered to be a very talented boy of color, and as I got better, Jesse, the teachers and who I was studying with were aware of society. They knew that I was my success of these lessons were outpacing their ability to help me improve. So they recommended teachers who were better teachers than they were, and who knew the instrument easier, better way to teach them what they thought I was looking to be able to do that's kind of beyond their scope. And it was seeing this response to a basic stranger, a teacher, who understood that if you have the talent to do what you do and are insistent on getting better at it, you got to go somewhere else to find the resolve to get that better. I got the resolve in my home. There were no black cello players at that time, Jesse, let alone in the orchestra. And that hasn't changed a whole lot. If you look at the pictures over the past 30 years, the racial disparity in the orchestra has not made a big jump toward a more open social view of abilities to play in the orchestra, philharmonic orchestra, a philharmonic orchestra. You Having said that, it's this drive to not let someone else determine my musical future based on my ability. And my parents were insistent that if you want to get to the top, Ron, you got to be better. You got to practice more sincerely. You got to be more honest with your practice. You got to practice with a goal in mind. You can't just go and saw, make rosin, make noise. You got to go out there and leave with something that you say, I learned this today.
No, that's
And,
very
that's, and I still do that, man.
do you?
Yeah. I go to work every night when I'm working to find out what joys am I looking for tonight? Who's going to
Mm.
surprise me? And who can I fool tonight?
But you
I love that
like
stuff. I love that stuff, man.
but I think it's beautiful, man, because that's the thing with music. There's this incredible, sense of achievement, but you can never achieve it all. So the thing is that
No,
always there's magic and surprise, man.
it's always this far away, man.
Yeah, I dig that. But for you, I mean, the your first break, you started working with Chico Hamilton and doing some wonderful things with him. But there was somebody in that band, man, and people that you became associated with it. I kind of feel really when I look at the evolution of your own music and your compositions that they were important in really giving you influence. And one of them was the great Eric Dolphy. You and Eric had this early association, and you worked on his album, and through this idea of what was going on with Chico with a very more sedate chamber jazz kind of thing. And then of course, with Eric, the really this wonderful musical exploration that people couldn't even define it, man. They called it, close to the third stream, whatever. But talk about that, and perhaps, that sense of innovation that was happening at the time when as you were getting started.
Well, I think in retrospect, no one can really pinpoint aha moment. You just know that you were in that moment. You one of the things about Eric I learned, Jesse, is that Eric was always ready to practice. He would always have his flute nearby or his saxophone not too far away. And he would just go outside in his little apartment in Brooklyn and just play scales on his. He said he had a little terrace. He would just play scales and arpeggios to find out how this saxophone or how this flute worked and what new fingering could he find to match this new order of notes that no one else seemed to be hearing. No one was playing like Eric Dolphy back in 1959 and 60, man. It's just Eric Dolphy playing that specific bass clarinet, man. He's hearing these sounds, and he was determined to find out what do these sounds mean to his way of hearing music. I watched that man for 2 or 3 years, and I said, "Well, gee whiz, if that's a route to playing what you hear, and not accepting anything except what you think is okay, or better than what last week's performance, and you still got these notes in your head, you got to figure out how to get them out." That was inspiring to me. Eric was always aware of another level of what he was aiming to do. And he never found comfort in that word that's pretty famous. It just is called almost.
Mm. But he, you know, the,
I'm from that school of thought.
but I
Almost
think,
not enough, man.
but the deal is that, he was part of your first record, that you did for the New Jazz record label, Where. And
Yeah.
this in itself was, featuring you on the cello. And it was just a beautiful album that came through. And I mean, to begin, being a leader, that in itself must have been a bit of a challenge for a young Ron Carter.
Well, I thought that's where it's supposed to go, man. No one told me it wasn't possible. My dad said, if you want to do it, it's always waiting out here. Get it here. Eric was encouraging. He said, he said, well, Brother Ron, you got something new here. You got to work on that. And Chico Hamilton, who showed me how to make payrolls out for the band and what per diem meant. And you got to have a tax statement. You got to know how to get the W-1099 form. All this stuff. He just sat down and said, look, if you're going to be a leader, Ron, he called me Ron L. Ron L., these are things that you got to know how to do. Or hire someone to do them for you, but you got to know what's going on with this payroll. You got to be responsible for the checks being written and make sure that they're covered by the money in your bank account. So for me, it was just not just playing with these guys, Jesse. It was how the business works when you're not playing with those guys. And
Mm.
today I say those traits, man.
That's an important lesson, man. Very important because a lot of
Yeah,
people never really learn it, to be honest with you, and they
yeah.
lose a lot along the way. But the thing is that, you also, as a result, wound up getting a great reputation around New York, and somehow, you landed in these studio gigs, man. And, the studio work in itself, at the time, a lot of the musicians were just being paid really, per gig. I mean, and little did they know that some of these records that they were on would go on to sell millions of records, into the future. But it's landing in the studios. How was it for you, Ron? And and particularly back in those days when people weren't overdubbing, you had to go in and what you put down is what you got.
Well, one of the things about that era of recording that unfortunately is no longer here due to reasons that are out of our control uh, was you had these big orchestras going there with these string arrangements and orchestral concepts, and studios had real 17-piece orchestras and big bands, jazz bands. Those environments, Jesse, were primarily all white musicians. So here we are again. This me, a young guy, not quite a beard, and certainly not verging on the gray hair mentality. I said, well, wait, where are these guys I grew up playing with? the jam sessions at Menton's and the Goldbug, all the joints I know where the guys really came out to play it after 2 o'clock in the morning. Then the stuff got how? Where are these guys? How come they're not in here? Why is it just me and the drummer? Those guys read. They're professionally got nice ties on. I mean, it was an uncomfortable time to be there because you were always on the mark representing a community of African American musicians, and I think that the comfort my dad and mom instilled in us and me that you can only be as good as you allow yourself to be helped me get through those times when I was only an African American on the scene.
Mm.
At the time, Jesse, Archie Bunker had a big show on, and that's not my taste in humor. I'm not one of those. That's not what I want to find comedic. And evidently one of the shows that came on, the orchestra members were having a great time mimicking some of the stories he told about the welfare community, hand on hand, and they said, they just had to laugh at that. And the guy said, well, yo, Ron, how come you're not watching those shows? I said, well, man, how can I laugh at someone who's making humor of a dreadful situation that he's responsible for? Where's the humor in that, man? And the resolve of that kind of comment, Jesse, was that I didn't get called back certain dates.
Mm.
Okay, I understand the consequences of saying that. You don't want to hear it? Then don't ask me that question. I won't tell you. But those are the times when it tests your mettle. You know that expression? Test your mettle?
Sure.
Yeah. Those are tests for us, and it's getting me. There were idols who I could look through: George Vivier, Milt Hinton, Red Callender out in California. Those were the guys who let everybody know that these African American musicians, they play great bass. Just give them a call. You don't know the contractor? Well, that's kind of on him. But this guy plays the bass good. Call George. Call the judge. Call Milt Hinton. Call Red Callender. Those guys play the bass like you want to hear it and play the parts right. Those are my idols. Those are my people who I watched break the barrier and deliver every night.
Mm.
The bass out of the case, they were all over. That's my idol.
Well, that's important, man. I mean, there really is. But when you stepped into the band of Miles Davis, how did that happen? And did you followed Paul Chambers, didn't you?
Yes. Well, I was working with Art Farmer at the time at a club called the Half Note, which has been gone. And I signed with Art Farmer for 2 weeks at this club with Jim Hall playing guitar, Walter Perkins on drums, me and Art. And after the first set, Miles had gotten to the club. I wasn't paying attention. I'm trying to play Art Farmer's music with Jim. And he called me over to where he was standing and explained to me that Paul and Wynton were leaving this band to put a quartet together with Jimmy Cobb for West Montgomery Quartet, because West was really getting hot at that time, man.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing on Sunset. He owned the record world. He's going to put together a quartet. He said that Miles told me he had a gig going to California for 6 weeks. Let me join his band. I said, well, man, I'm telling myself, this band is better than dirt. I have to say yes. I said, Mr. Davis, because I didn't call him Miles then, Mr. Davis, I'm working with Art Farmer for the next 2 weeks. If you would go find Art Farmer and ask him to let me go, I'm happy to make your gig. Otherwise, I can't leave Art Farmer until the 2 weeks are up, because I owe him that. Well, he found Art, and they worked out that I could leave his band the next night, two nights later. And I joined Miles April 1968 or something like that. But I think that solution, my solution, impressed Miles that here's a guy who's responsible. And Art felt that here's a guy who really respects me and my decisions. And that kind of paved the way for the rumor mill to get going. And he told Miles, I'm busy right now. He call me later, And Art says, well, yeah, he asked me to go. I let him go. That's an improvement. That's another step on the ladder this guy to make. Great, good for him. Just join me when I call you again. Call me. I will be there. Thank you, Art Farmer. Goodbye.
But you were part of a great, great band that eventually wound
Yeah.
up getting together, you know, the second great quintet. And I was in high school when I picked up the album ESP, and I was a young
Mhm.
guitar player, you know, trying to figure out things and all. And, you know, when I heard that album, there was just something that really connected with me. And because of the way that the music was written, because for my ears at the time, it was different, but it was still, you know, something that was understandable. You know, I could still be able to kind of pick off some chords, pick off some things, and it was just really a great lesson. And to me, that album was also very important for you because of the fact that your compositions, you know, were put in that album that kind of gave Ron Carter more of Ron Carter, the composer, you know, which was very, very cool. Talk a little bit about that the second great quintet, and perhaps as you guys went into, you know, those albums, you know, the ESP, the Sorcerer, Nefertiti. Those are important, you know, really steps in the evolution of jazz, man, you know?
Well, I think to this day, none of us had any clue that those records and the music we were playing would be, to this day, still one of the most important steps in the step ladder of music, doing something different. You we had maybe one rehearsal, two rehearsals in 5.5 years. And those records that we made in the studio were already made with no rehearsal. We went in there, but we all laid out our music, hit the parts, make sure they were copied correctly and all parts looked alike. And what you hear on those records is maybe no more than two takes of each of those tunes. Uh, one of the things about that band, Jesse, is everyone trusted each other's point of view. And no one was the boss of the view, so to speak. At some point, they put out a record called the Freedom Jazz Dance, which records a whole day recording with Miles Davis in the studio. And you hear Miles ask for our advice, make a recommendation. We play it. If it didn't work, we'd stop and say, "No, that's not it. Let's try something else." He was he was clearly the band leader, and we clearly respected his point of view. But then that didn't prevent us from putting in our point of view, which he was glad to hear. And one of the reasons we developed this relationship was that we had such high regard for music. And this group of guys that Miles assembled, me, Wayne Shorter, at the point, George Coleman, Tony, and Herbie, he found four guys who were just as curious as he was. And were not afraid to put the foot in the water that may be too hot for the moment, but even hot water cools down, man.
Big that. But one of the things that people have always said that was quite exceptional about Miles was his ability to listen. Do you agree?
Absolutely. One of the things that one of the easiest, how to say this, the easiest way to complain about Miles was that he left the stage when the band was playing. And I said, yeah. If you notice, when he came back, it was always at the right time. Never came in too late. Never came in on the wrong changes. Never came in on the wrong part of the song, the form. So whatever he was doing back there, this music, despite him not being on the stage playing, had his undivided attention, whatever he was doing back there, man. And if you understand the results of him coming back when he did, they'll let you know that whatever he was doing back there, the band still has attention. So that means that your plural view that he wasn't on stage when the band was playing and what was he doing back there? Whatever it was, man, he came in right on time.
Dig that. But you know,
Yeah.
one of the great tunes that I always appreciated from ESP, and it really has gone on to become a great standard that you co-wrote with Miles was 81. Talk about 81.
Well, at the time, we all brought in songs. Some of them were titled, some were untitled, like song number one, song number three, whatever it was. At the time, there was a dance. Miles's wife was a former dancer, Frances, and she thought she knew all the dances coming out. And he said, "Well, this sounds like a song for a dance that they're working on now called 81." So hey, Ron, call it 81. I said, "Okay, that's what we'll do. 81."
I didn't know that, man. I didn't know that. That's a great story. But you know, one of the myths, if you will, that exists of you with Miles really was this the occasion when you guys played the plug nickel, where you guys really kind of decided that you wanted to do things quite differently. And the way I've heard the story was that, you guys were not going to accept the conventional way of the way things were being done. And so, you decided to do things differently, but you didn't tell Miles. So when you listen to the Plug Nickel recordings, I mean, this is a recording full of surprises. And there's times when you see that Miles is truly surprised. That was really quite an episode, man.
Well, I think part of that rumor just is that we had me, Herbie, and Tony sat down. Herbie, Tony, and I. Sorry, you people who went to the grandma out there. I had decided that we would have a conference with the three of us, and we were going to play some anti-music. But that's just a rumor. I don't know how that got started, but we never discussed music in that really simplistic sense. We understood that we were doing something a little bit different than the normal bands at that time, but we were not so concerned with giving it a name. I think personally, we were more concerned with, can we get this better, whatever it is, and understanding that after a while, Miles wasn't going to say, stop doing that. Hey, lay out, don't do that anymore. We never heard that kind of negative comment from him. We thought that he's the band leader who's got a direction for us. We're trying to follow his path with our footsteps. And because he never discouraged us from doing whatever it is could be found we were doing, he was always surprised because he never knew what we were going to come up with. Because, Jesse, we couldn't name it for him. We couldn't say, here it comes, too late. Now here it comes again. No, how's that possible? So he was as surprised as we were, and because we were still playing when he was getting surprised, it was even more fun for us. You got him now, man.
That's totally cool, man. But you really did serve as an anchor for that group because when you hear Tony, Tony was this incredible
Wonderful, man.
yeah, and there's these colorations, the sensibility, and then Herbie comping in this incredibly beautiful way. There was just something about the way that you guys interacted, but you were that anchor, man.
Well, this is the color, right? This broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, if you can see me blush, I'm a kind of nice maroon right now, so I'll let that
Oh.
color for me.
But it was a very beautiful
Yeah,
chapter. But
we,
the
we,
deal too is that you also were at a point where with Miles, when Miles began to hear the electric sounds, and for you played some electric bass and all, but you didn't stay with the electric bass very long.
well, there were guys, Jesse, who were so far ahead of my development on electric bass. And Monk Montgomery came to be a really good friend of mine, because I had great work with Wes. And we had discussions about he played with Lionel Hampton back in the day when the electric bass was called a pork chop. Uh, and the engineers, it took people like Monk Montgomery, later on Victor Wooten, Steve Bailey, uh, those guys, Jerry Jamont, you know, to Chuck Rainey, who gave the electric bass enough personality that those guys, engineers, had to learn how to recapture this personality these guys gave them. They
Mhm.
put a lot of time in, each of those guys, plus more. I was worried about, how can I get the upright to sound good? How can I make my F sharp on this chord that I think is the wrong note sound correct? That's why I had spent enough time developing or trying to feel, what is this I'm hearing, man? What is this going on? I knew I couldn't keep up with those guys because they were so far ahead of me as far as development, sound, gear, love of the music, of the instrument. I said, well, let me just kind of hang around here a little bit longer and see what I can stumble on in the ashes of bad last night's idea. Pretty good choice.
Hey, but the thing is that people just respected the sound that Ron Carter was bringing to the Arco bass, and as a result, even, when you transitioned, working with Creed Taylor with those CTI recordings. Those CTI recordings, man, were magnificent in the sense of the sonic quality. The sound was so beautiful, and the way that, arrangers would come in and texturize it. And it was just really great to be able to hear that Ron Carter sound. And that was a strong period, really, for the music, because Creed was an incredible not only producer but also knew how to market this music and present it in a very new and unique way, whether it was these incredible glossy photographs on the covers, or just wonderful ways to do it. And talk about, Creed just passed away last year. you know
Yeah.
how was it working with Creed, and perhaps what did you glean from that experience?
Well, Creed had a sense of the current music library. Whatever the pop songs were that were being played on all of the radios and fan clubs, he had a finger on what those songs were. And he picked some really wonderful jazz players who could interpret these pop songs because they weren't written for solo. They were written for two courses of lyrics. Let's take the sucker out. He hired guys, Jesse, who could take these two courses of lyrics into a 6-minute jazz track. And he would meet with Freddie or George or Herbie or whoever the leader of the day was, and go through a library of songs he thought that would sound not just good for these guys to play them, but there's enough meat in these songs to tolerate being extended, played past their limit, being played past their 2-minute original time frame, you know. And he discovered Rudy Van Gelder through his work with A&M, and decided Rudy should be the guy who's going to record these wonderful musicians playing these not so usual jazz songs on a label called CTI. I met Creed when he was working with A&M and working with Joe Beam, records he produced them, and Creed decided that this is the sound he wanted to be associated with his label, CTI. And Rudy and unbeknownst to everybody, Rudy was a guy who was a scientist. He wanted to know how to record these guys and how can I get the same sound. So he had his own drum set, he had his own piano tuner, he had his own microphones. He didn't have any assistants. He was just Rudy Van Gelder with his house, with his studio, with his gear. He was working just by himself. He would cut the master in the studio, and that master would be what you hear on the records on the radio. He's a one-man operation who understood his sonic presentation of the music was very important to the popularity of the records he was putting out. And Creed understood that too.
Mm. Did he record you acoustically?
I'm not sure. I had a pickup sometimes and an air mic, but not an amplifier at all. No.
Interesting, interesting. But the thing is that, with all those recordings that eventually you stepped into once again, Ron Carter, the leader, and you started recording for Milestone and doing some beautiful records, man, that really were quite nice. And Milestone was a label that was, founded by Orrin Keeve News and Dick Katz back in the day. And
Yeah.
and that in itself, I had the opportunity, to know Orrin, lived out here in the West Coast in San Francisco. And excuse me, real quick. Uh, but Orrin Keep News had his way that he always used to tell me. He goes, my job as a producer, he goes, is just to be able to make it happen. He goes, it's the musicians that are going to make the music and let them happen. But you reproduced a whole bunch of those records for Milestone, and that in itself is also an important step. Ron Carter, the producer, because much like Creed Taylor did, the music the way that he wanted to hear it, you were able to do the music the way you wanted to hear it. And talk about that chapter of your years at Milestone.
Well, one of the things I was pleased to have been a part of is making all those records and watching those various band leaders work the record. How do you make the guys who don't feel like playing right now, they want to fool around and just jam, not do that? How do you have guys who you call for the recording session, have enough faith in your ability to assemble guys who you think will play good together? Those guys play good together. How do you convince the band that these arrangements by whoever it is, Don Sebesky, Bob Freeman, I believe will be the kind of arrangements that you can take on the road with you. And they'll sound as valuable on your road as they do in Rudy Van Gelder's studio. Now you're going to have these guys say to you that, okay, well, this bass player is not in your band, but make the record sound great. And you won't have the bass player in that band become offended because he's not on the record.
Mm-hmm.
My job was kind of make that vibe work,
Mm-hmm.
you know, thanks to the creator, I have the ability to make that kind of stuff happen. I love, and one of the things that, of all the many things I took away from this, Jesse, is how how to help the guys get the maximum of their ability in a short space of time. In a nightclub, you can play all night, man, and guys do. In the studio, you got 3 hours, 4 hours to make a whole record. How can you help the band understand that? You know, you can't go off for a smoke and come back a half hour later and still be squealing. No, man, it doesn't work. It's a little more complicated than that. You know, how can you show them you needn't play so hard here now because it's just you in this room with these guys? Just step back a minute. So you'll still sound good. You won't sound pressured. You won't sound over the top. You know, and I was the guy who was able to help them understand the difference in playing in the club and on the record tape.
Mm. That's good leadership, man. That's good leadership, and I think that being able to see it is something that really is a great quality, in a person. But the thing too is that you also, worked a wide diversity, man, of gigs, and one of the things that I've always been impressed with was, I mean, for me, I've been hosting a Latin jazz show for many years now. And of course, you worked with some of my favorite people, man, the great Ray Barreto, you work
Mm.
with Gato Barbieri, you work with Joe Beam, you work with, Rosa Pasos and so many other folks. And I mean, and it seems that, that all these concepts that we think of sometimes, whether it's the cachao tumbao or, that whole sense of what a samba is all about or a bossa nova, because you also work with gets. I mean, and the deal is that these were sometimes ideas that, that nobody had really, put down the way that they were supposed to be played. So Ron Carter had to kind of create a sensibility for a lot of this music to transition it into the jazz world. Talk about perhaps some of those ideas and these people and how you approach some of that music.
Well, back in the day when there were a lot of clubs in New York, Birdland, be particular right now, right next door was a Latin Palladium, a big place over on top of a car center. Plymouth was a car dealership, and upstairs on the second floor was the Palladium where the Latin guys had music every night. Tito Puente and Johnny Pacheco, they were up there playing their brains out every night. Candido, you know, and when I worked at Birdland as the second band of the two band gigs, I'd be over there on the intermission trying to find out, man, how does the bass player get to that sound, and how does he keep the beat going with this stuff going on? And it's got playing singers. Wait a minute, guys, stop. I was into that kind of zone. And when I made my first record with Wes Montgomery, who should come to be but Ray Barreto? Man, what an experience that was of playing with this beat that I heard 30 years ago at the Latin Casino. You know, what an enlightening feeling that was to know that this is part of what they do that's so valuable to the kind of bass line I could make if I could figure it out. And here we are, man. Ray's gone, but the music he started is still here. Johnny Pacheco, those guys still lay the night's format for me, experimenting with kind of bass line I could make in rhythms to not get in their way, but give them other tonal choices with their tuning timbal and timbales and stuff that kind of, I call it the garbage can stuff they play. It's just wonderful. And I'm happy to know that they thought I was okay, and I thought I ended up giving them some nice music that they could make this bass rhythm, make the bass note choice, help their tumbao and all that stuff. It's really great for me to watch that take place and be a part of the Latin community.
But the great sound that you added to it really was very important, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that also, as your career goes along, one of the things that you stepped into was to become an educator. And, you know, you began to teach, you know, at local colleges and doing some wonderful things. And you've been, you know, honored for that. And, you know, I think that that's one of the things that's always important in the world of jazz is that, you know, a lot of people really want to pass it on. And for you, that whole sensibility of teaching, you know, students and trying to uplift them, you know, with your experience, with what you've gleaned, you know, all these years. Talk about the importance of really reaching out to educate the next generation.
But you know, uh, how far back can I go? 60 years ago, music was in the junior high schools and the first and second, third grades. The teacher would come by from the Board of Education and have a little concert with the kids in the auditorium. You know, that was 50, 60 years ago, man. What happened to that? How come we can't do that anymore? You know, Jesse, one of my friends had an expression that always rings in my ear right now. He says he longs for the day when the music department gets the scholarship money and the football players got to sell tickets and sell cookies for the band uniform, for the uniform for the team. We kind of got, we kind of missing the point here, you know. And there've been enough scientific surveys that says that kids 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15 who have some musical training, some musical experience, some musical lessons, some arts program are the generation that had done most for moving things along in a positive way in society. And as soon as schools understand the power of music and how it helps kids to grow up and be productive citizens, as well as maybe the next Bird, maybe the next Charlie Parker, maybe the next J.J. Johnson, maybe the next U.B. Blake, who can tell? But the music is out there waiting for someone to discover it. And these kids aren't getting the chance to see maybe they're the one. Or maybe there's something out there besides whatever they're currently doing with their spare time that makes music also available to them. Because this is what it sounds like to play it, to be a part of that orchestra sound, be a part of a trio, man. We miss that. They miss that. I miss it because I don't see the kids doing that right now because they're not encouraged to do it at the age 5, 6 years old. There's no music in the terms of music, in terms of programs. There's no money, there's no equipment, there's no space, and it's too bad. My job just is to go to the schools when I can and put them a little free concert and show them what the bass is all about. What is that, mister? It's called a string bass. I saw one of those in the book. Well, now it sounds like this. No, don't touch it. Just stand right there for a moment. Just hear what it does. Now, here's the string's called the A string. How's that sound? Oh, wow. That's live. Yes, this is live. I love that stuff, man. I do it whenever I can.
Yeah, well, that's important, man. That really is important. But you know, you've inspired so many bass players, so many wonderful musicians, you know, in this, you know, great career that you've had, Ron. And for you, I mean, now as you have the 87-year revolutions around the sun, I think that, you know, you have done something that has been quite phenomenal in advancing your instrument and advancing your music and in advancing this music in general. How do you want to be remembered, man? I mean, you know, when you cross over to the next plane, how do you want people to remember you, man?
Wow. I'd like to answer that question 10 years from now.
Well, good, good. Well, why don't we leave it at that then? And
Yes.
in 10 years, I'll give you a call and then we will
Thank you.
talk about it. We'll talk about it. But you were telling me, man, you've got gigs coming up, man, and
Yeah.
any new recordings we can look forward to, and also you had a great film done of your life, man, which is also cool. So Ron, man, you're in the movies, you're on TV, you know, you're on record and all that. You've transcended all the mediums. And look, we're doing this by Zoom now, man.
Lowercase letters, Zoom. Well, you know, I'm trying to find out how this stuff works so I can connect with my friends and make new friends. And I found out that this social media, people who help me out are really great at doing what they do and just take me to areas that I could not get to on my own. I thank them profusely. And if they go to Ron Carter Jazz to see my little library, my publishing company, my books, my stuff, take a look and see what's available. Thank you.
I really appreciate you, brother. Thank you. Have a great time. Anything you
Thank
want
you.
to say to the folks in San Francisco in closing, man?
I miss Berkeley. They had a great studio out there with Orrin Keaton News and the people at the studio. Phil Bray, a great photographer from San Francisco. I miss all those people out there now. I hope to get out there before the snow hits New York again to say hello to you live.
Oh, that'd be great, man. Let me ask you one though. You know, there's a song that you also were involved with. It was called RJ. Who was that for?
Ron Jr.
Ron Jr. That is cool, man. That is cool. All right, brother. Thank you, man, for the time. Love you madly, man. And again, happy belated birthday, and
Thank you.
keep swinging, my man.
Jesse, hugs when I see you again. Save a hug for me. I know you're a busy guy. Just stop when I see you again and stop and say, excuse me a moment. We call it square.
Right on, brother. Thank you, man.
Thanks.
I'll catch you
All right.
soon. Much love.